Welcome to Bipolar Broadcast Podcast. I've got crazy logorrhea, and you're invited to listen. And today, I'm going to talk about I don't know. I'm going to talk about talking and talking enough so that I create a podcast, and not talking so little that I don't create a podcast. And today I will be attempting to do my podcast with peaches in my teeth. Yes, I just ate a peach, and some of it is still in my teeth. Another useless fact is that today I killed a spider. And I don't usually do this, but this one was huge, and it surprised me, and it happened. So sorry to the spiders of the arachnid family. And because I have bipolar, or I am bipolar or something, I don't generally say the D word. You know what it is. It doesn't need to be said. And it could be replaced with other words, but I won't go into that now. And recently I've been doing some research. I'm trying to put together a book. And I've learned a lot about myself. One thing I learned by reading a PhD dissertation. And I want to properly reference this. The dissertation is called Patterns of Language Use in Mania. And it's by somebody named Bess Sermon Fjordbach. And on one of the pages, there is a table 6.1 to be exact. And it says, proposed model for linguistic patterning in mania. And this is where I learned something about myself. And I learned a lot from the rest of the dissertation as well, though I've only read about half of it so far. And this I'm sharing now because it might paint a picture of how this bipolar broadcast podcast might go. So here it is. Attentional shifts and related cognitive/linguistic breakdown. A. Intra-individual manifestations. That sounds like it means inside the individual. So the first is distractibility. The second is memory impairment. And the third is over-inclusive thinking. So I may get distracted. I may not remember things, and maybe, hopefully, I will remember not to remember that I didn't remember. And over-inclusive thinking. So I might just start including a lot of different things in what I'm thinking about and relating them as if they actually relate and are included in that category. Personally, I really like doing that. It's fun. B, extra individual manifestation. So these ones are outside the individual. So loss of topic. I guess if I'm speaking with you, I might forget my topic. Limited insight. And I'm assuming that means limited insight into one's bipolar. And the third is language use, which is difficult to interpret. So if that happens, you may have to fire up some extra brain capacity if you want to interpret what I am saying. Otherwise, just chalk it up to it's all just a bunch of illness garbage. Then you don't have to listen or try to interpret. And presupposition. Okay, just give me a moment here. I'm going to look that up on Google All right, so presupposition, the action or state of presupposing or being presupposed. So I guess that means either you'll presuppose me, or I'll presuppose you, or I'll presuppose. And I think that ends there. Accelerated rate. I think that goes without saying, don't you think? Yeah, I think so. Accelerated rate, yeah, that means talking faster. Blah, blah. Good thing if I have a whole podcast where I'm talking too fast, you can just slow it down. Now here's a new section, recurrent patterns. So the recurrent patterns are idea generation and perseveration. I don't know what that means, but apparently it's something that I do. So I looked it up, and it means that there is a repetition of a particular response, such as a word, phrase, or gesture, regardless of the absence or cessation of a stimulus. So that is from Wikipedia. I would say this whole podcast is going to be perseveration because there's no real stimulus. I'm just going to be stimulating myself with my idea generation and things that come into my brain. The next section is specific linguistic indicators. First is lexical fixations. I think that's fixation on certain words. And impaired coherence and cohesion, meaning that not everything goes together and coheres very well, which can make it difficult for a listener to understand or even tolerate. And the last section, other linguistically mediated processes. The first is elevated mood and increased energy. And that's interesting because it's saying that these linguistic features could be part of what is elevating our mood and increasing our energy. So if you want increased energy and a happier mood, all those things that I just talked about as being so not really helpful for the listener, do those things for yourself and have fun with language from a perspective that it's not really a problem for you, these things. And you'll feel happy and you'll have lots of energy. And I came across a lot of other different things in speech that are problematic for listeners or an audience of someone with bipolar. Here's another term, Glossomania, the excessive practice of inventing languages. I don't know if you've ever invented language as a bipolar person. I've certainly invented words. I think there's a different word for that. They also created another word called xenophonic, which means one who speaks or sounds strange. From a bipolar perspective, or at least my bipolar perspective, in elevated states of consciousness, people speaking from their ego structure sounds kind of strange. Being fascinated with the past, with what happened, with this and with that, with sort of like mundane pleasantries or social niceties, when all of a sudden there's like a big grasshopper and you just want to go and chase it and play with it and watch it. It's like being as a child again, which is fun. The word for creating new words is neologisms. We can also create new words with idiosyncratic or personal meaning. There's another word for a private language that may be spoken, cryptolalia, or written, is cryptographia. I think we should create a private language for bipolar people so we can communicate without other people understanding. This would be helpful because a lot of other people don't understand anyway, though they could understand if we had an open dialogue of sorts and share and unfold meaning together. I found another definition for neologism, which is better. The coinage or use of new words, a newly coined word or expression. And I've made up lots of my own words. I will share a few momentarily. Here are some other things that I discovered are problematic in the way we speak as people with bipolar. And I'm sharing some of this because we can use this as a clue to try to attempt to make our language structures more palatable for those who are listening to us. And also, these are a lot of the things that are being used to create this label. And if we've already got the label, well, it's too late. But at least in the future, we can possibly ensure that we are communicating in such a way that is understood and acceptable. I think sometimes it's somewhat understood and then not acceptable. And I've realized that it seems to me that there is a sort of languagism, if you will, in culture, in that we can't use language in certain ways. We can't question language. We can't mess with the structure too much, or then we can be labeled with certain things. And with mental health diagnoses, a lot of times they don't have much to go on because there isn't a diagnostic test. And a lot of times they are looking for language behavior. It's actually part of behavior. Language is part of behavior. It's a behavior. Get it? Behavior. Did I say it enough? Behavior. So they can only look at our behavior because there's no blood test, there's no scan of the brain, there's no nothing so far. Even though they tell us that they know that it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, which I've been doing a lot of research lately, and man, they have so many theories about what's going on, and they've done so much science, but there's still no clear answer. But it's clear that there's many, many, many theories besides the chemical imbalance in the brain. I remember reading one study, and it started its introduction with something to the effect of, since we call it a chemical imbalance, we need to find some evidence of a chemical imbalance at some point, dated 2018. So they still don't really know, but they've created that meme that we take and assimilate into our own mimetic structure, and then that explains it. So we're satisfied and we're somewhat comfortable with it. And that's fine. I'm totally fine with that. But for me, I like to explore other things, and I'm finding the science recently quite interesting with how many different possibilities there are of what is happening and the potential for that. Because it doesn't seem like much of it's being integrated into a whole. It's just different parts that could maybe be therapeutic targets of medications or something, and they're not really looked at in a holistic view, which is fine. It's all about reductionism and finding, the magic lever. And, I like my magic pills myself, so I'm not trying to complain. I'm just saying there's so much interesting stuff out there to look at. And I'm looking at language, and I'm looking at many things. So more about language here. With bipolar, our syntax is messed up. And the syntax is the arrangement of words and phrases to create well-formed sentences in language. So at some point when we learn what a well-formed sentence is in language and speech or writing, we should, keep going with that. I do remember reading that we don't really use subordinate clauses we use a lot more coordinate phrases. And that means there's more coordinating conjunctions like and, but, for, or, nor, yet, and so. So if you hear yourself saying those things too many times, you might want to beware. Maybe you're getting a little manic, or maybe other people will notice, because you could likely keep saying sentences and then saying another sentence, but then you forget that you did that for if you don't stop, yet you don't want to stop. So, and I just tried to use all of them in one run on coordinate phrase after coordinate phrase. So beware of that, because that can also relate to the rapid talking. And to me, I realized that not using the subordination, I feel is a part of, it's a part of mania, but using subordination is part of the ego structure of language, where you say something and then you realize that the next sentence isn't as important, so you subordinate it, or the next phrase or the next clause. You kind of make it lower. And in the ego mind perspective, which is different than a manic perspective, we're always subordinating and measuring, and this is right and that's wrong, and this is higher and lower, and judgment and opinion. But in mania, it's quite different. And one meme goes after the next meme after the next, and they're not related necessarily. Some are. And then also, we aren't measuring which one's better or worse. They're all sort of equally interesting, but different and unique and new. So there's no, the breath structure isn't the ego pausing and deciding what it is that is better or worse, or how this should shift in this big long thing. In mania, it's different. It's like one thing after another, and it's all interesting. It's like, looking at one flower and then the next and the next and the next, and they're all different, beautiful flowers. And that's the thing with mania, is we don't know what is the most valuable, so we kind of say everything, and it's a more truthful state. And that's another thing about the language of mania, is that people don't like to hear the truth about certain things, or the truth about what we're thinking or what's going through our minds. They'd rather us be, subordinating to the point where we subordinate something just to be a thought in our own mind and it not come out of our mouth. And so another thing about this subordination or non-subordination and coordination is that There says something about here, rapid talking, which is often loud and can be difficult to interrupt and maybe difficult to understand. Frequent topic shifts, flight of ideas, blah, blah, blah. So for me, I like to write my ideas down in my iPhone notepad. And I have a lot of them. I came across an interesting YouTube video that showed that babies understand and imitate the turn-taking nature of communication. It was really interesting because they showed a little robotic gizmo talking to a person and them talking back and forth, but the gizmo was just making a funny sound. And when the person laughed and the gizmo made the funny sound, the baby started talking to it. It's sort of like when you say something to your cat and then it goes meow, and then you say something to your cat, then it goes meow. Well, they understand that sort of turn-taking nature of consciousness and communication. And I bring this up because sometimes, apparently, we people with bipolar forget that. And so if you want to appear as in a normal consciousness, that is something to keep in mind. And as I'm saying this right now, I'm learning this for myself as well. And I'm talking to myself and sharing it with myself, because when I talk to myself out loud and I verbalize it and I hear it, then there's a feedback in my brain that is helping me sort of remember and learn these things. And I don't think I've had a super issue with a lot of these things. And I'm guessing that perhaps you haven't either. So it's not meant to be patronizing or anything like that. I just feel like it's a bit fun to use some of the science of what is being said about us and almost used against us to either make it more fun and doing those things, like being more distractible and more over-inclusively thinking and, talking faster if we want, or dialing it back. So it's sort of like having a sense of what our control knobs are based on the scientists who have studied people like us and seeing if that can be helpful. It can be helpful by practicing, I don't know what it's called, but sort of maybe regular acceptable language use while in a state where maybe we would otherwise just default to manic form. And manic form is great. A lot of us can do free form, spoken word. We can riff off anything. We can make rap. We can make beats. There's poetry, so many different things. And it's kind of okay for bipolar people or regular people to use those forms in a certain genre or medium. But in the medium of daily life, beware. So knowing which language structures and forms we can put where in our own lifestyle design as we want it to be, not only conforming, that's not what this is about at all, but being able to sort of figure out what we want for ourselves. And we can also have rapid speech, apparently racing thoughts, verbosity, which is like wordiness. And this kind of stuff is fun. And as I said, I'm writing a book, and I was going to write my book with a lot of this stuff in it. And then when I came across this research, I was like, wow, if I write in this way, people aren't going to understand me. And I do want to try to communicate something here. So some of this fun stuff, one is called clang associations. And these are, according to Healthline, groups of words chosen because of the catchy way they sound, not because of what they mean. Clanging word groups don't make sense together. People who speak using repetitive clang associations may have a mental health condition, such as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. So, if people hear you talking in this way, then they might think that you have this kind of mental health thing. Now, once we're aware of this, maybe we can use these clang associations and do so consciously and then turn it off, or don't do it in front of other people. Do it as our own thing in our own private space. And then apparently we can also have sound-based speech, tangential thinking, more switching between semantic subcategories, and semantic overactivation or meaning overactivation. Here's some other helpful tips. Respect turn-taking, detect emotions in someone else's voice. Adopt appropriate body posture and facial expression according to the social context. Continuity, across adjacent utterances. So just stick to the same topic. If you're talking about the weather, just talk about the weather. Or just talk about the weather. People are comfortable with that. So shorter duration and higher frequencies as well. So don't talk so long. Another interesting thing I discovered is that in the UK, they have sort of speech remediation and language therapy to improve discourse skills in people with mental health diagnoses. At least schizophrenia. I don't know about bipolar. I also don't know how widespread it is, but I do know that they do have that. And considering that speech troubles are something that is a big indicator, it does make sense to try to retrain people how to speak in a way that won't get them into trouble in society. And they were successful with helping people with that. And from my experience, sometimes I did forget how to use language properly. Sometimes I couldn't speak at all. So I do think these sorts of things would be helpful for people, because a lot of what we are gets erased and something else takes over in bipolar, like in mania, for example. And then after that ends, a lot of times the brain is just sort of completely wiped of all energy, and then to at some point have some speech help could be very practical, especially when you look in the DSM, and I haven't looked in it, but a lot of the boxes to check in order to indicate a diagnosis are linguistic, language type things. And another point that I read that was interesting is that even though that is so, a lot of the check boxes aren't actually really scientifically linguistic terms. And psychiatrists don't have any linguistic training at all. So they're I guess, taught to check those boxes if it's appearing, but it's not really coherent with linguistics and the actual science of language. So I found that really interesting. And here's another list, and I got this from an article called Speech Language Pathologies Serving Clients with Mental Illness. And it was a chart that charts the following deficits. Response, fluency, intelligibility, vocal quality, cohesion, variations, pause time, vocal intensity, prosody, physical contacts, feedback to speakers, physical proximity, eye gaze, specificity, accuracy, adjacency, variety, extremities movement, interruption, overlap, initiation, selection, introduction, maintenance, quantity, conciseness, repair, revision, facial expressions, change, contingency, gesture. So this I am saying so that our neural tribe or neurotribe, I want to call it a glial tribe because we have 10 times the number of glial cells in our brain than neurons. And they do a lot. And that's part of what I've been researching, and it's quite interesting. So I'll say glial tribe. I would say that is a neologism, a newly created word. How fun. I want to talk about a few more things about language. And for me, in mania or having bipolar, it means that I have a curiosity about language. Maybe you do too. And I'm curious about it. I wonder about it. I play with language. I play with words. And words seem to play with me in that a new word will come to mind. So I feel like language is a playful thing. Yet, with what I've described, it sounds like it's very set. And new language is, of course, created out in society. And to me, it seems like if it's something scientific that needs a new name or some kind of like hashtag or social media type thing, then it's okay to create a new word like a selfie or something. But other than that, not so much. And so I feel like with us, our glial tribe, that part of our role is to create new language and to play with it. And we're not the only ones to have tried this. I remember reading a book once about a type of English called E prime. And E prime is where English is spoken in such a way that eliminates the verb to be. To be or not to be? Well, the only part of that sentence would be not. That used to be a thing too, to say not. And I quite liked it actually. Bring back not. So the reason to get rid of the verb to be is something about when we say something is something, it's basically an illusion because nothing that we say is something is really how it is. Maybe it's how it is at that very moment. So if I said, I am a maniac, that's not really correct. But if I said, I had mania last October to January, then, well, I wouldn't want to say had because that's still to be, but I'd have to say something like, it seems that I experienced mania last year. So it's supposed to create more sanity by saying things in a time-binding way instead of a way that sounds like it's always that way, because it can mess with our brains and our minds and our relationships. So if I just say, that person is a jerk, I could say that person acted like a jerk. Maybe he was upset or something, So I'm not saying it very well because I don't really practice that so much. And another word another person who tried to create a different mode of English was Dr. David Bohm, the physicist. And David Bohm is awesome. He created something called the real mode, and he explains it in chapter 4 or 5 of his book, Wholeness and the Implicate Order. And I don't remember too much about it, but it was trying to make So if we said something, we'd be able to sort of concur and discover if it was coherent or not, and then go from there. And there's also something called the Georgia Guidestones. And if you look it up on Google or Wikipedia, one of the tenets is that a new language should be created out of 8 different languages to be like a one world language that unites the world, because we're divided by our languages. And I'm not saying that's the way to go, but it's interesting that there's something showing that we need to, change our language structure. And another point about that, which is quite interesting, I came across a paper that confirmed one of my suspicions that I already had. And that's the thing with this science that I'm looking up, is most of it is cohering with what I already expounded upon myself by just sort of taking one step and the next, and different meanings came to mind. And basically all these language structures that I just read out as indications of some kind of bipolar thing, all these different things can actually lead to one being able to create an amount of context and perceptions that come together in a cohesive, integrated whole of contextual scaffolding, such that one can just look at something and kind of understand how it works just by looking at it. But that has to happen through creating that context for oneself and coming to those realizations by oneself, because just memorizing outside information can't create that type of super fast calculation, because memory is stored in the brain cells, and when you create context, I feel like it's stored more in a cloud hologram that you have access to. So it's like building your cloud hologram. And that's why this is a fun process, because of being able to kind of look around like you have Google glasses on or something. Like, I've never had those things, but I may as well. They're kind of inbuilt, and anything that technology can build, most things, we already have that capacity. We've just been sort of trained out of it, so the technological version can be made and sold back to us. So anyway, there's a paper by this guy called T.J. Crow, titled Language and Psychosis: Common Evolutionary Origins. So basically, the suspicions that it confirmed is that people with psychosis, psychotic disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, we are the missing link. It seems that the mutation that was able to create the species, Homo sapiens, with our brain full of knowledge and our language, which is our distinguishing feature, is something that is there in people with schizophrenia and bipolar psychotic disorders. And the reason they figured this out is because people with these disorders generally do not procreate at the same rate of everyone else. And since that is a fact, the disorders of a psychotic nature should be bred out of the population. But they're not. They prevail. And they prevail at the same rate in every culture around the world. And by their calculations, that meant that it has something to do, the psychosis and the evolution of language has something to do with each other. And that means that we're sort of the people that were able to be the ones that brought this humanity as we know it into being. And I also feel that we are the ones that, if given the chance, could help to bring it to its next evolution. And a lot of that would be linguistically, because we have the ability to play with language and language plays with us. And language is psychedelic, and it's what's going to change our perceptions and change our default mode network and change our salience network to make something else salient. And, I want to hang out with the insects and things like that. Oh man, I don't know what'll make me sound like I'm saying there, but, like bugs. So if it is a fact that whatever it is in us, people with these bipolar things, is actually what allowed us to become Homo sapiens as we know it, I feel like we need to take our place as the, shamanic people. But shamania is like mania plus shamanism. But, not like traditional shamanism, because they know what they're doing. But I just mean, I don't think that we should be pushed to the margins and medicated like that. We should be understood, and we should be having a lot of dialogue to sort of filter out some of the noise from the signal and come to some kind of understanding together and bridge the gap between people who cross over, so that we can at least walk in both worlds, not as somebody who is squashed down, but somebody who has something to offer, if that was allowed to be nurtured. And the very things that we're linguistically shunned for could actually be something that can help to liberate certain energies needed to be liberated. And I feel like it's unfortunate that right now we are experiencing a type of languagism, and we're also experiencing a type of experience policing, because we have certain experiences that are sort of otherworldly and out there. And R.D. Laing wrote a really great book called The Politics of Experience, and it outlines all of that beautifully, about how we're allowed to have certain experiences, but not others. Now to give you a few ideas about words or neologisms that I created. I created the word alchemanic. So it's a melding of alchemy and mania. Alchemania, alchemanic. I also created a bunch of different alternatives to bipolar disorder. I created bipolar operating system, bipolar IQ operating system, bipolar approach, bipolar invitation, bipolar opportunity, bipolar challenge, bipolar boomerang, bipolar alchemania, bipolar shamania, bipolarian, bipolar spellbinding, bipolar wonder weaving, bipolar basket case, bipolar awesome, bipolar beauty beholder, bipolar shifting paradigms, bipolar leading thought, bipolar generation culture, bipolar possibly quantum, bipolar heavenly holograms, bipolar guests uninvited, bipolar context queen. There's a talk out there about mindset, bipolar mindset, I thought, but also mind flow. Who wants a set point when you can have a flow? And bipolarify, bipolarified. And also, I felt like we could say that we have a flowy language. I created the word maniquesting, which is like questing and manic together. I also created a word because there's a lot of talk about manifestation. I feel that if one manifests from the ego, it's actually manifesting, because it's more like festering. I also created omnipolar, as omni means limitless. So bipolar is binary, which is like up and down, good and bad, light and dark, but omnipolar means limitless. And I feel that that means that it's more accurate to how it feels a lot of the time. I created a word, transconscious, because I feel sometimes that bipolar consciousness is trans, meaning that it can process the Newtonian world sometimes, and then the other time it's processing a quantum world or a quantum holographic world. So our consciousness is trans, and once we go into quantum consciousness, our brain is working and changing the structures so that it works according to that. And then when that's no longer happening, it's hard for it to go back to the Newtonian way. So it's almost like now it doesn't fit into the Newtonian, but it's sort of back in the Newtonian paradigm. So we have trouble functioning, and it's more because our brain is now adapted to a different mode of the world that we've already seen. It was very obvious and very real, but very unreal for people who haven't had a glimpse of that. And I created a word related to transformation, which is transforminglish, because in order to really transform, we don't have to transform English, but it would help. Just like talking in certain ways can elevate our mood, or talking in certain ways can make us see certain things, or can be psychedelic and lead us in different directions. When first there was the word, there's something to that. And we have that same power to play with words and create words and create alchemy with that. So I hope you see the fun of neologisms. Be careful where you sprinkle them, though. Here's a quote that really speaks to the real suppression or dismissal of speech from a person with schizophrenia. And this is an older quote. It's from 1995. And it's by A. Sims. And it says, quote, "Schizophrenic speech is composed of unusual oral creations, which cannot be considered as a language, as the latter is nothing if it is not creative." And that is languagism right there to me. And it rings untrue because the way we speak is creative. Some of it's noise, but just as children learning a new language, a lot of what they say is gibberish or noise. That's necessary in order to create the structures in the brain, to bring it together and make it coherent. And I do think there's a larger coherence, and I think it'll only come about if we refuse to shut up and start talking with each other in dialogue which is unfolding and sharing meaning. Reading the book by David Bohm on dialogue would be helpful. And lastly, I feel we need to upgrade our language from Newtonian subject, verb, object, separation, division to a quantum language, because I feel like in mania and certain states, I've observed quantum things happening at the macro level. And the brain, I feel, needs to be sped up in order to see it. There's so many bits of information around us at all times, and we're only focused on a very, very, very small amount that's available, and the brain filters it out. But if we have a quantum structure of language, or our brain is sped up, then we can see these quantum occurrences happening in everyday life. And that's why there's certain things that appear as glitches in the matrix or different things, is because reality is quantum and probably beyond quantum. But science is mostly Newtonian, and everyday life level is Newtonian, and our brains are programmed to process and see things at that sort of speed, at that frame rate. But then when our brain speeds up, it's sort of like watching an old film where the frame rate is so slow that you can almost see the gaps. And then that's why people look kind of like Matrix people. They don't even look real, because they're kind of like glitchy and moving kind of glitchy, like robotic in a way. And they're not really moving robotic, but from our perspective, that's sped up with the whole, Einstein's relativity. We're sped up. We're almost like a different speed of light and different cosmological constants. And everything that's not of that looks weird. I've seen that happen. It's really weird. I've seen it happen quite a few times. So we need to remember that many, many people haven't seen this. But anyway, if we can create different structures of language and practice with each other in conversation to see if we can understand, it could help, because these language structures can help build up the brain cells so it doesn't have to speed up so fast and then slow down so much to go between quantum and then back to Newtonian. Quantum is like mania, and then hitting the wall and going through psychosis, and then depression is slowing down like that. And so, we need to build in the language structures so we can see the quantum and everyone can be there, instead of, when our brains speed up, we go to this future state and pretty much go to the future now and sort of extract some of what we need in order to get there. But we need to come back and share it, just like a shaman goes into trance to go back and help his culture. They need our help and they don't realize it. And they don't want our help. A lot of us have put our energy into them hopefully helping us better, and that's slowly happening, which is lovely. But we need to silently and kindly help. And, we don't even have to do anything. Just extrapolate and unfold some of this context and share it with each other and talk with each other and build in that network of language. So that's all I have for today, and I hope that was whatever and fun. So next time I will talk about something else. And until then, I hope you have fabulous, fabulous day. Last random factoid, today I bent over and I ripped my pants. Never happened before. It happened.